Welcome to the 2 o'clock class as opposed to the 1 o'clock class. Chess for knights. I guess knights are better than rooks based on the names of the classes. Okay, and well, first I'm going to yell at the audience at home. I'll get to you guys later. All right, so in my last video, although it wasn't my last one, it was the last one now, but it's going to be 2 videos ago for you guys because across the street. Okay. And you guys should have complained that the video was too short, but instead you complained about the editing. The editing was perfect. Okay, you guys you don't know what's going on. This is the magic world of Hollywood over here. You guys are at home and you're like, I got to go get a drink and I can't follow the game and I don't know what's going on. Okay, so you got to stop that. You got to focus. Okay, and this is actually a kids class, unlike the previous video, which was not a kids class. This is a kids class, if you can call them kids. 2, 4, 6, 8 kids, terrible. Aren't you guys ashamed that your brethren didn't show up? They look pretty ashamed. Okay, no talking. Yeah, this is live right now. They can hear you. Okay, now, today we're going to talk about the French defense, and it's a very funny reason why. Because I was asleep this morning because it was like 11:30, so I haven't woken up yet. And then my girlfriend texted me, in the French defense, how come this and how come that? And I was like, this is why. And she's like, I don't agree with that. You're an idiot. Rawr. And I was like, but what about this? And she said, no, that's stupid. And then I said, what about this opening? She goes, no, you're terrible. All right, so that was how it went. Okay, now we're going to talk about all that stuff because all that texting took about half an hour. So this should take about half an hour because it's a half an hour class. Okay, and then you'll edit it down to like 5 minutes. Okay, sort of like The Sopranos for regular TV, edited to 5 minutes. Now, we're going to talk about the French defense, and we'll actually get to the specific position later. The French defense, Black has one goal. Black wants to play d5, but Black doesn't want to move his or her queen. Okay, because after takes, and you want to take back, you got to move your queen. Or you could try to take back with a knight. Okay, or if it's the 1 o'clock class, you could attack the pawn.
It's not the 1 o'clock.
Or if it's the other class that's not the 1 o'clock class, which is even the chess for beginners, what's it called? No. There's another one where they teach you upstairs. What? It doesn't have a name? Yeah, then bishop g4 attacking the queen. Okay, or if it's you at home, king d7. All right, so the point of e6 is I want to play d5, but I want my pawn defended. So white plays d4 and black plays d5. And that's the French defense. Now, in theory, the French defense was invented in a telex game. And you don't know what a telex is because you guys, yeah, exactly, because you guys are kids. And if you're an adult, you would know what it is either. I actually used the telex once. In 1984, I was in Moscow, and I hadn't talked to my parents in 3 weeks. So I sent them a telex because they didn't have the internet. And phones it wasn't so good, the phone. Don't do that. That's where you do this, and then they get it to somewhere else. So there was a match between Paris and London, and then they played by telex. No talking. And then this is what Black did, and Black was Paris, so they called it the French defense. That's probably not why that happened, but that's what I read, so I'm sure it's true. One of my favorite French defense games is a Morphy game where he was Black and won in like 15 moves. But I've shown that game on your videos like 50 times. We don't want them to complain at home because free content from Grandmasters, there's nothing you can do but complain nonstop. Okay, now in the French defense, White has several things that they can do. And I have a funny story about the French. Don't make noise like that. Okay, you're making him look good, and that's impossible. All right, so in the French defense, I was playing Yasser Seirawan a long time ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, no talking, and Yasser plays the French defense. He also plays another opening. So I was like, maybe he'll play the French defense. And if he does, I like to play pawn takes pawn. That's called the exchange variation because I'm exchanging. And so I went to my computer and I looked at every Yasser Seirawan game he ever played in his life that's on a computer where he played the French defense. And I found 0 examples of this move. So I was like, huh? Anyway, the game ended. He did not play the French defense. He played the Caro-Kann. He beat me in 6.5 hours. And I said, before the game, I thought you might play the French, and I was looking at the exchange French, but I couldn't find any games that you ever played in it. And he goes, no, nobody's ever done that against me. So he's played this position with Black over 100 times And he said 0 people have played pawn takes pawn. And I was like, what? Okay, if you're playing at a lower level, you guys know what I'm talking about, then you're going to face pawn takes pawn quite a bit. And you have a symmetrical position. The position's the same, and it's white's turn to move. So white has a small advantage, but nothing serious. Yeah, that's not a testing move. The testing moves are knight c3, defending the pawn, knight d2, also defending the pawn, and e5. And we're going to look mainly at e5 because that's the hardest for this class. Now the class is confused. The reason the class is confused is when you guys play chess, and you at home, if you can play chess, the main games you guys have open centers. Everything's open. You can do whatever you want, okay, TI style, right? Exactly. But in the closed position, you can't do anything. This bishop can't get out of here. This bishop can't go here or here because you lose it. This knight can't go here because you lose it. Your queen can't go here or here because you lose it. So this is sort of blocked. Nobody in the center could move anything. Well, the difference is, since white has this space and black can't do anything, black has an advantage. His d-pawn is defended by a pawn, and white's d-pawn is not defended by a pawn, and this pawn can't go back here and defend it. That's illegal. So what black does is he starts attacking that pawn.
It's overextended.
Overextended, maybe. Plays c5, and white's like, so what? And black does it again, and white defends it again. Now, in this position, black has 2 moves that are common in Grandmaster play. Queen b6, obviously attacking the d-pawn again, and bishop d7, developing the bishop. Now, when I was asleep and I got this text, the text was, after bishop d7, why does white play a3?
Yeah.
And white doesn't have to play a3. That was just the game that she was looking at. And she was like, why'd the guy do that? So I gave very good explanations because I'm Grandmaster. I said, well, in some positions, black wants to play knight b4 or bishop b4, but that's never going to happen. Never, ever. Right? And I said, and sometimes white plays b4. And when I say sometimes, I mean usually. Anyway, she didn't like that explanation. She's like, wow, white's not developing his pieces, playing a3, playing on the side. That's terrible. I was taught to develop your pieces. So I gave an example. I said, let's say you develop your bishop. Now after takes, I could play knight b4, attacking your bishop. Or I could play bishop b4 check, and then I could play my knight to e7. And I said, if white's pawn's on a3, which is what the guy played, it's very hard to get these 2 pieces out. If the knight goes here, it blocks the bishop. The bishop goes here, it blocks the knight from going there. So a3 has a lot of good ideas. Now, I gave another example because sometimes when you look at opening A, you want to look at other openings for comparison. What's the name of this opening?
The Sicilian.
Sicilian. And the most common variation of the Sicilian, if you're a Grandmaster, is, say it again, is the Najdorf, named after Miguel Najdorf from Poland. Okay, although he didn't live in Poland because he had to get out of there. No talking. A6 is correct. Good talking. A6 does everything A3 does. It stops white's pieces from going to B5, just like A3 stops black's pieces. And white wanted to play B4 in the other opening. Black wants to play B5 at some point. So the Najdorf has a very similar idea to the move A3 here. We're protecting the B4 square, so black can never go there, and maybe white will play B4. Now, one of the funny variations in the French, after queen B6, white can blunder his d-pawn by playing bishop to d3. And if you're good at counting, we got 3 guys on the d-pawn, and we got 2 guys defending it. And by the way, we had 3 guys defending it, right? But we blocked one of them.
Oh, I know. It's not a blunder. It's a trap. It's not a blunder.
It's like Family Guy. It's a trap.
It's because
Okay. So after we trade, no screaming. Raise your hand if you want to say something. Don't raise your hand. You.
It's not
Okay, so if we try to win a pawn, because winning a pawn is good,
You need the bishop to check, and then you win the queen.
bishop check, and we have a discovered attack on the queen because you discovered it. Okay,
And then you win it for free because if he walks with the bishop, just trade first. No, you can take the queen. Yeah, but then you lose a piece for it. If you just take the bishop, it's
so they're arguing about whether white should win a queen or a queen for a bishop. Both are good choices. I would prefer a free queen. Okay, so that's one of the traps in the French defense is you can't take this pawn right away. Now, based on your knowledge of this trap, and you don't want white to play bishop b5 check, winning your queen, right? What move should black play? You with your hand up.
bishop to d7.
Bishop d7. Where'd you hear that from? That's correct. And then there's many Grandmaster games that start this position. Many. And usually white sacrifices the pawn, and black says, how come I didn't develop my king side? And he's like, oh yeah, because I'm a pawn up. Okay. Now, when you're a lower rated player, or a beginner, or not an advanced player, like you at home and you here, you're very dogmatic. Okay, and the reason you're dogmatic, if you're at home, is because you're reading crazy stuff on the internet, so you're dogmatic. And if you're here, it's because you don't know anything, so you just say the one thing that you know over and over and over again. Wait, Ben Simon's not here, just like Donald. Okay, now he has to find it and edit it out. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh man, if he doesn't find that out, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Don't talk unless you raise your hand, and don't raise your hand.
Why do you
All right, don't talk unless you raise your hand. We do have security here. Okay, now, so, yes. Now, dogmatic means you know something, and then you just keep saying it 500 times in a row. And you discount everything else. So for example, let's say white castled, and you were like, oh boy, a free pawn. And it's true, black is ahead of pawn. So you could say black is ahead of pawn, and you could say it 1,000 times. So black's winning, because I was taught when you're ahead of pawn, you're winning. And then your friend might say, it's move 9, and you didn't move any of these pieces yet, and you moved your queen twice, and you moved your knight twice. And white's already castled, and it's white's turn to move. Black's never going to castle. And you could say white's winning. In fact, both of those things are true, except for the winning part. White has more development. White's castled. Black's going to make some more queen moves, by the way. And black's up a pawn. So some of you might want to be a pawn ahead, and some of you might want to have the attack. That's why people argue. Okay, it's not that one is true, they're both true, and that's why chess is difficult. So that's a pawn sacrifice. Now, a lot of people don't want to sacrifice a pawn, so they don't play bishop to d3, they play bishop to e2, and their queen is defending their pawn. However, bishop looks pretty good on d3. Okay, e2 looks a little more passive. Okay. The other problem that white has in the French is that it's very hard to get these pieces out. And of course, the knight wants to go to c3. If you've played chess before, probably your knight's gone to c3, right? But when your pawn's on c3, your knight's not going to c3. Therefore, black doesn't want to trade pawns really early. A grandmaster would never do that, because then the knight can go to c3. So we want to leave that pawn on c3 so white can never do that. If white puts the knight on d2, his bishop on c1 will never move. On the other hand, if we play the variation that we just discussed with bishop to d7 and a3, it's possible white's going to play b4 and then put his bishop on b2 and fianchetto his bishop. That happens sometimes. Okay, so this is a very hard position, because with all the pawns on white, it's hard to get this bishop out. And with all the pawns on dark squares, it's hard to get this bishop somewhere. And when black plays queen b6 very early, which is very common, it's very hard to move this bishop because you lose this pawn, right? Now, somebody who used to work at the club and very recently retired was our scholastic director, Bill Thompson. And Bill Thompson always had white in this position. He's rated about 1700. And he played bishop to e3 because you can't play queen takes pawn yet, right? And if somebody played queen to b6, attacking this pawn, he would play queen to d2, defending his pawn. Okay, and then he would develop his other pieces in castle and so forth. That's what Bill Thompson liked to do. And most people don't play bishop e3, so when he played it, his opponents were like, huh? And that's all he ever did. So he knew a lot about it. His opponents were confused early, right? Makes sense. He played his own variation, although he stole it from some grandmaster. Okay, so if you know the opening and you know moves that are uncommon, but you play them a lot, and your opponent's like, huh? I don't know that move. That's uncommon. Okay? Then you can't really be a pop star because you're not common.
Oh, you're gonna have to find another living.
And the kids here never heard of common, so they're like, what? Okay. Actually, there's a photo I saw on the internet with Maurice Ashley and Common and the CEO of Starbucks.
What?
Yeah, I saw it like 3 days ago. So the French defense, that's the advanced variation. It's very complicated. Some people don't want to play e5. They want to develop their pieces. So they play knight c3. After knight c3, one common move is to pin the knight. That's called the Winnow variation. And some of you, and some of you at home, have heard of Bobby Fischer. Not all of you, but some of you. And my dad, who was a chess master, played Bobby Fischer once in 1963, and that was the position they had. Yeah, it was 54 moves. It took like 6 hours. And nowadays, grandmasters play e5, but this game was played in 1963, so Fischer played a3, takes, queen g4, attacking 2 pawns. Knight f6, rook g8, rook g6. And this is a funny game because white's made 1,000 queen moves and both sides have a terrible pawn structure. So chess is hard. And the game went into a bishop and pawn endgame. If you go to the internet and type in Fischer Finegold, you'll find the game. And if you're at home or you're here, you might say, oh, Ben Finegold, I know him. I wasn't alive in 1963, so it wasn't my game. And you'll be glad to know that my dad was a chess master, my brother's a chess master, my son's a chess master, my first wife is a women's international master, and my second wife was an 1800 player. So when you see Finegold, you're like, wait a minute, who is that? You could assume it's me, and if the guy won, then you could assume that. Now, a funny story, I like stories. In the New York Times, they have a chess article, they used to. They got rid of it because the New York Times is a great paper. Anyway, they used to have a chess column every Sunday and Tuesday, then every Tuesday, then never. When they had a chess column in 1992, they put in the game John Fedorowicz, Ben Finegold from the US Open. Ben Finegold got crushed. And they were like, wow, Ben Finegold's terrible. And then I wrote the newspaper and I said, that wasn't me, that was my dad. And they never put a correction in because, you know. So if you have an issue of the New York Times from 1992, the August, the chess column, it says that I lost the game I didn't play. All right, so that happens sometimes. So there's a lot of Finegolds out there, and sometimes they're here at the chess club, like my son's here today, right? Oh man, you gotta find all the times I said, yeah, I only said it once, although she said it like 9 times. When the kids say, what do you do? Yeah. What if they're like, I was playing bridge and I trumped? All right, you'll have to, the context is important. Okay. What if you're playing bridge and your opponent's Donald Trump and you say Trump a lot? And you're not sure which one I mean. Okay, very good. All right, who's the quietest? What if I give a long talk about Hillary Swank, but you don't know which Hillary I'm talking about? Ooh, that would be tough. Okay, now, some of you are like, wah, I don't want to get pinned. So when your opponent goes here, you start crying because your knight's pinned. For those people, we have a move for you. We can defend our pawn with our knight and not get pinned. Hooray! Anyone? Knight d2. Now if your opponent pins you, you're like, yeah, right. Like you could pin me. And so nobody plays bishop b4 after c3. That's silly. The problem with knight d2 is our bishop can't make a lot of moves, right? Okay. So some grandmasters play knight d2, some grandmasters play knight c3, and some play e5. Those are the most common moves. And knight d2 is not bad because later in the game, when the bishop moves somewhere, we're going to maneuver our knight over to the king's side. Or our knight could go to the queen's side. Or our knight could go to the center. So it's on d2, but it's temporary. It's not that bad. Okay, one of my favorite games, you can look it up at home, is a game played in the U.S. Championship, about 4 or 5 years ago, between Hikaru Nakamura, many-time U.S. champion, and Yuri Shulman, who won the U.S. Championship once. And they started from this position, and Yuri Shulman won a very nice game with a lot of tactics. And Yuri Shulman did something I've never heard of.
Yuri Shulman.
Who is he?
What color was he?
He was black. Yuri Shulman always plays the French. Okay, now if you want to cheat, and you want to cheat legally, no talking, here's how you do it. Let's say you want to learn an opening. Let's say the French. And you're like, oh man, the French, that's a lot of work. There's books on the French. There's 1,000 games. I don't want to look at that. I'm tired. What you could do, which I do, is I find a really strong player who only plays that opening, then I look at their games because they already did all the work. Okay? So Yuri Shulman always plays the French, and his US rating was 2,700. So he plays the French every game, and he studies the French a lot. So I look at his games, and I'll play like him. He already did all that work. Why should I do any work? Okay, and I don't play the French, so I didn't do that. But I'll find a grandmaster who's much better than me, top 10 in the world, who plays the opening I play, and I play like them. Because they play pretty good.
What opening do you play?
Well, I'm not going to tell you because then you'll beat me. Okay, that would be. I actually play every opening so that nobody can prepare for me. In fact, when I was your age, I only played the French. Then I got older. So, then I stopped. Okay, so, and when I say always play the French, when it's legally possible. No talking. Okay, now, after knight c3, we could also take the pawn, we could play knight f6, or we could play bishop to b4. Those are the most common moves. And after that, there's even more moves. I'll show you a really funny variation called the McCutcheon, so you can see how funny chess is. Here, e5 is the most common move, but some people pin the knight. And here, bishop e7 is the most common move to unpin the knight. But some people pin that knight. All the knights are pinned. And when I'm teaching the 1 o'clock class, I show them this position a lot because this is the two kinds of pins, absolute and relative. You see what I'm saying? Here's the 2 o'clock class. This knight's pinned, and if you move it, you lose your queen. And this knight's pinned, and you can't move it because you check. And after e5, some of you are confused. Luckily, you walked in the room confused, so nothing really changed, right? Okay. Now in this position, you'll notice the knight's attacked, and the knight can't move. That would seem good for white. However, this is a normal opening. How can we have a normal opening and black's losing a piece? Now, I'm going to tell you a secret if you listen. When your bishop is pinning somebody's knight to their queen and your pawn attacks it, 99% of the time, this is the right move for black. There's only one move for black that doesn't lose a piece. Selena, does your mom know? No? You don't know? Do you think she knows? She went like, oh yeah, I know. But she didn't want to give the answer away.
What is it?
What?
What is it?
I'm not hearing you know. Come on, man.
What?
How does black not lose a piece for nothing? What does he do? That just delays the inevitable. You're still pinned. What is it?
Pawn h6.
That guy's right. Pawn h6. You attack the piece that's pinning you. If white is very insistent on pinning you, then you attack him again. Okay. Now in this position, you will be surprised what the most common move is. No, I've actually done that, and I lost in 85 moves in the U.S. Championship. About 12 years ago to Jesse Cry. He had the right name because when the game ended, I was crying and he was crying. Yeah, true story.
You were both crying?
No, he was crying, I was crying because I lost.
What?
Okay, so the most common move is bishop to d2. No talking. Now, the knight's not pinned and this knight's attacked. And the main line is bishop c3, bc3, knight e4, queen g4. And grandmasters argue how to save this pawn. Some play g6 and some play king f8. Depends which grandmaster you ask. Well, no, nobody does it with their rook now. And castling is risky. Castling's risky. It's not the best. And you'd have to cry a lot. Okay, so the McCutcheon is complicated, right? And also, one of the tricky new moves, and when I say new, it's like 15 years old, is bishop e3, not unpinning the knight. Okay. And I've actually played this with white, and it's not good for white. Yeah. And this is considered better for black. My opponent played queen f6, knight c6, castle queenside, and white's king doesn't really have a safe place. Okay. But I tried. Okay, and if you go to the internet, you can find the game I lost to cry. Okay, that's what happens when you play an opening you never played before, then you lose. Now, I'm going to show you something funny. It's a gambit. Bishop b4 I just showed you, but also bishop e7 unpinning the knight. e5, knight d7. Most grandmasters play bishop takes bishop. There's a world champion you never heard of. Like one you heard of him. He was the world champion after Capablanca. He was the next one. He beat Capablanca. That's why he was the world champion. Yeah, Botvinnik was after, but Botvinnik didn't beat Capablanca. They did play.
Alekhine?
They played. Alekhine's right. Okay. Do you know why Alekhine was no longer world champion? You know what happened to him?
Because someone beat him.
No.
He got a concussion.
He what? He got a concussion. No. He died when he was the world champion. That's never happened before or since. So there was no world champion. So they had a tournament with 6 players, I think. Maybe 5. And they played 24 games. No talking. Yeah. And then there was a big tournament, and it was won by the guy you said, Botvinnik. So Botvinnik won this big tournament with a lot of people, million rounds. Now, Alekhine, you said, has a defense named after him. He also has this pawn sacrifice named after him in this position. Instead of taking the bishop, Alekhine played h4. And then black said, oh boy, a free pawn. And Alekhine said, oh boy, my rook has an open line, so when you castle over there, I'm going to mate you. And Alekhine said, oh boy, I'm going to play knight b5 and take on c7. So actually, more than half the grandmasters now, they don't take that pawn. They're afraid. They think they're going to get crushed. Okay, so that was a pawn sacrifice. You don't have to take the pawn. You could play like a6 here. And then white would never play this and checkmate you. If you play c5 right away, and now when white plays this, white might go here, and then you'll cry. Because if you take the knight, you lose your queen, right? That's funny how we're seeing how a6 and a3 are good defensive moves, stopping your opponent from crushing you. So the French defense is complicated. Okay. Now I used to play something called the Fort Knox. Okay, and that was because it was solid. You couldn't break through it. Okay, unless you watched the movie Goldfinger. No, this is a true story. Okay, so after the knight goes to d2 or c3, it doesn't matter. We take. And now grandmasters today like to play knight to d7 and then knight to f6. But I like to play bishop to d7 and then I play bishop c6. In the 1 o'clock class, I get to take this knight almost every time. But good players don't give their knight away for nothing. They either move it back or they defend it, right? Okay, and then I play knight d7, and I play knight f6, and I play bishop e7, and then black has all of his pieces out, but he's very solid and cramped. I like that. Then my opponent goes crazy sacrificing and I win. Something like that happens. And the Fort Knox is a very boring, solid opening. I wouldn't recommend it. What's good about this playing this way with black is it doesn't matter if white goes here or here. I take the pawn on e4 either way, and we get the same position. See, I have to learn less. Okay, good job, right? All right. So there's the advanced French where white advances. There's knight c3, played by which world champion against my dad? You said that 10 minutes ago, I forgot. Bobby Fischer. And there's knight d2, which Karpov liked to play a lot, the Tarrasch variation named after Grandmaster Siegbert Tarrasch. Okay, if you don't like that move, you can throw it in the Tarrasch can. Okay, or you can play the Caro can. Either way.
It's Caro Khan.
But that's not funny.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's a-
right. Now, I had a guy play the Carol Con against me, and I told my friend William Shatner, and he said, Con! He was really mad. Right? You don't get that joke. Why are you laughing? All right. Okay, so the French defense is very interesting, and I'll tell you the main reason with the French defense discussion today. Now, when you're a kid and you learn chess, every game is E4, E5. Okay, that's 99% of kids' games. Okay, and then I'm like, E4, E5 again. Okay, but if your opponent is always doing E4, E5, that's every game they play, and then you don't play E5, then they're confused. If you're playing somebody and they're like, yeah, he's gonna play E5, that's everybody plays that, that's all I know, and you pick up your E pawn, and they're like, yeah, E5, and you go E6, they're like, wait, what's that? So when you play beginners and you play E6, they don't know what E6 is, okay? And they don't face E6 very often. When you play stronger players, good players, they face E5, E6, D6, D5, C6, C5. They got to learn all that stuff. So when you learn E6 and they have to learn 10 different openings, advantage you. But if you play E5, they're like, yeah, every game is E4, E5. I know everything. And I play E5 myself. So, not me. I mean, that's what your opponent is saying.
I've never not played E5.
You've never not played E5. Yeah, I agree with that. So the French defense is very interesting. Because you get different positions than you would get with E4, E5. And so you could have a lot of experience playing an opening that's not E4, E5, and then when you play somebody else, they've never seen it before, and you've seen it for years. Advantage you. So by going off the beaten path, you too could enjoy Robert Frost. Class dismissed.